Good morning, everybody. I'm Aude Richard. I'm a journalist specialized in energy. And today we're going to be talking about talking together to get people on board. Best practices. Unrolling renewable energies today is a major challenge, and managing the integration of projects in the territories. Because beyond the technical aspects, the real question is local adherence. How can we clearly inform, get all of the stakeholders to join in and build a territorial narrative? And how can we understand the oppositions to answer in a constructive manner? This is what we're going to be talking about with our four speakers today. We will have three main parts. First of all, understanding the obstacles with consultation, tools. Are they real needs or rather trends? And how can we manage oppositions and how far do we need to go? So as this subject looks at very different situations, we've set up an application called Slido so that you can ask your questions. You can flash the QR code on the screen. And if you zoom in, it does work. Or you can go onto the Slido website and you can then ask your questions live. I will be looking at them as we go along, and we will stop regularly to answer the questions. But anyway, we will keep some time at the end to take your questions. If you don't like the apps, you can just raise your hand. And that will be at the end. Before starting, I'd like to know who's in the room. So who are you? Are you developers or project bearers in the room? You can raise the hand. Are you engineering officers? Communicators? It's good. It's quite varied. Elected representatives?
Bienvenue, madame.
Welcome. Students?
Très bien. Des citoyens, des associations?
Citizens, civic associations?
Merci beaucoup, en tout cas, de votre...
Well, anyway, thank you for being here. And we're going to be starting with the first part.
Voilà.
Understanding the obstacles. So, why do projects get stuck in a territory? And more broadly, what is the personal vision of consultation? And that's what we will be looking at with Paolo Orozco-Suol. Please come up onto the stage. So you're a founder of Courant Porteur, a consultation practice specialized in renewable energies for the past 15 years, and you set up discussion spaces to talk about local challenges and stakes. Oh, I forgot, I'm sorry. You are also a guarantor of a consultation, and so you're approved by the National Commission of Public Debate. That's a very important point. To begin with, can you explain whether consultation always has the objective of getting people to accept the projects? Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Actually, before answering the question directly, I think it's important that we understand the difference between regulatory consultation. So, regulatory consultation, which is dictated and guaranteed by the National Commission of Public Debate, and voluntary consultation, which I think is really what is of interest for the audience here. And as indicated in the name, the voluntary consultation depends on what you want to do. It's very important to see this difference, because when we're looking at voluntary consultation, we're opening out for discussion, and that's what we must understand. By opening out for discussion in a territory where you're developing a project, we give the public and the local population the possibility of expressing their fears, their expectations, their needs, their constraints. And this is where the question of the acceptability of consultation is no longer very relevant. I'm sorry for saying this, because we move on to a question which is far more interesting. That is the conditions for the feasibility of the project. And that is what consultation allows. And that's what the objective should be, I believe, personally. So what are feasibility conditions of a project? It means that being able to understand according to which conditions we accept and we say yes to a project, yes on condition to that, or no, only if. These are the questions. And so consultation for project bearers allows this. They can identify the conditions under which the project is feasible. Thank you very much for this very clear introduction. We're now going to welcome Pauline Rona, who is responsible for the Consultation Centre in EDF Power Solutions, and Clémence Swede-Poncelin, who works in the ECLR Occitanie Civic Energies. So you're very rooted in the territory. Pauline, in EDF Power Solutions, you manage an entire team working on consultation to help developers in the field. What is your vision of consultation in the scope of your projects within the territory? Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you for this invitation. You were talking about territory. So yes, that's part of our DNA in EDF Power Solutions, to work very closely with the territory and in particular the local elected representatives. Moreover, we never start a project without having talked upstream with the elected representative to trigger the studies and understand what the acceptable conditions would be for a project. And you try to get them to like renewables. Well, talking with the elected representative of the territory is not a question about getting them to like it, but it's first of all an obligation. We mustn't forget that there was a law for the acceleration of renewables, which obliges us to organize project committees. So for every project bearer, we must remember that talking with the elected representatives is an obligation. We also believe it to be absolutely necessary. They have a very refined knowledge of their territory, the stakes, the needs, the expectations. They are also a supporting structure in the planning of their territory. They also develop territorial coherence plans, energy territory plans. And so designing a renewables project means first and foremost working with local elected representatives to integrate the challenges and the needs of the territory, and also give ourselves a project of developing projects that are placed in the service of other public policies. We give meaning to our project when a project can participate in decarbonating energy, but also when we work in favor of agriculture or social aid organized by the towns in the direction of the elderly in rural areas and farmers. So for us, the elected representatives are really a structural element within our project. So when we define our consultation systems, how can we design and implement a consultation plan without having talked with the elected representatives about their habits in terms of consultations, or around their fears and their expectations? And this is why we're lucky in EDF Power Solutions, and I have somebody who's responsible for consultation who's present in the room, Nassim, to have a centre that has been developed over the past 10 years with 6 consultation managers throughout France, and who help not only project managers but the elected representatives, because it's a real team job to design a consultation system that is adapted to the territory. So, an aside, yesterday we were in a round table about training, and this profession, consultation managers, is very popular at the moment. It's trendy. And thank you for organizing this roundtable, which puts a spotlight on all the professions, because we all work in very different structures. But this profession allows dialogue, and that is a key to move ahead. So the elected representatives are structural forces within the consultation. Clémence, you also work a lot with elected representatives and citizens. That is the DNA of Éclair Occitanie. How do you work in the territory? Probably differently from EDF. Well, first of all, there are a lot of common points, in particular the fact that we consider that we cannot lead a consultation territorial dialogue unless there is a key role played by elected representatives. As from the design of the consultation system, we involve the elected representatives. For example, we spent 2 days going from door to door with the elected representatives, so that in the field with us to open the doors, because we are nobodies in Aveyron, whereas everybody, knows that everybody there. So we are the duo that will be the framework that builds trust, and then the elected representatives open the doors. So when we talk about territorial dialogue, you might have noticed that we've said this word several times rather than consultation, and we had a chat about this before. For me, the idea is important that consultation have a beginning and an end, but territories that don't have a beginning and an end. So citizens, elected representatives, all of the local stakeholders must engage in discussions around energy, but also around other themes. And this discussion must be organized. But of course, we must be aware that there will be no end. So we need to do it again the next year and the year after also. So for climate plans, for example, it's very important for us. Of course, it requires means, and it can frighten territories and elected representatives because they don't have any more money. But inhabitants move, they forget, and the time of consultation is not the same as that of the life of a person. So, once we've understood that, we know what to expect. And I would also like to clarify that people think that consultation requires means, but when we mobilize inhabitants, ask them to get babysitters for their kids and come to a gym, a badly lit gym, to talk about a project that might see the light of day in 10 years' time, well, we have to make this moment a special moment and give the means to, for example, a hydro engineering to do the studies. We will give 1 year for the study of wildlife. But consultation requires at least as much means, because we are looking for the expertise among inhabitants. And therefore, the question of means and giving it time is very important. So we'll go into that a bit more later on in the second part. But before this, I would like to welcome Julien Lecomte. You are a mediator in your Blue Parole practice. You're also approved by 6. So you're a sworn practitioner. And you are used to managing rather virulent oppositions with sometimes people who are really against renewables. How can we make these discussions more peaceful? So first of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. So I use mediation. I am a graduate in mediation, a member of the association, and a sworn mediator to the courts, which makes me legitimate. Of course, within the framework of renewables development, it is traditional mediation. I, above all, use ethical tools and deontology that we have to develop territorial processes. So the answer to your question, mediation means establishing a framework that must be agreed upon collectively. More distantly, and we mustn't forget, mediation, which appeared in the 70s, is inscribed within the philosophy of non-violence. So before saying that we will get the people to agree, which is not what I say, I would say, first of all, let us set up a secure framework where everyone feels safe and free. And people have the right to leave a mediation process when they want, but the mediator can also, if people do not respect the framework, a very simple, common-sense framework of respect, collective consent, the acceptance of the role of an arbitrator, of a third a trustful third party that the mediator plays. And by establishing this clear framework, I like an expression in our profession which says that the mediator has 100% authority and 0% power. And power and authority seem to be synonyms, but in fact it's very different. Therefore, we must establish a framework of authority. Of course, the fact that I've been a sworn mediator recently gives me more legitimacy, but the important thing is to establish a framework. And, of course, what is important to you is freedom. Yes, I defend the fact of rehabilitating the place of oral communication in our society. It doesn't mean that writing is worthless. I come from the world of writing, but I think that putting orality back on the stage as a mode of social regulation, we can see in certain societies, and this was the case in our societies before modern times, the eras, was something very important. A Cameroon philosopher talks about the jurisdiction of the spoken word with regard to the African parable. But I think that in terms of law, the word friendly in judicial terms is based on this orality and a discussion between people. So we understand that it's not consultation but dialogue, both in the territories and face-to-face, that counts. But when there are quite structured opponents opposite, what do you do? Concretely, what are the tools that you can use? So when we prepared the roundtable, you said, well, there are lots, it depends on the situation, etc. So can you each present one tool and explain in which framework it is used? And maybe the cost also, because we're talking about dialogue, discussions, and that means calling upon human beings, which means a cost. So how do you structure things, and with which tools? Paula, maybe? Yes, indeed. I would really, once again, like to underline something important. We've all said it here. Consultation is a process, voluntary. We said process, system. It's not a procedure. That's something quite different. A procedure has a limited time, and that's the case of a regulatory consultation, but a dialogue process is infinite, and that is important. So how do you engage in a process? Well, you need to envisage the consultation over a long period of time, and therefore the tools will be designed accordingly. To give you a concrete example, first of all, there is a rather buoyant trend currently. We're used to raising the question of why we're doing something rather than what we want to do. And this was the debate we had. There are tools, methods everywhere. And we all know them. And we can all implement them. That's not the question. The question is, why do we do this? Who are we talking to? And why are we talking to that person or this type of stakeholder? What is our objective? We're going to engage in a dialogue for how long? And what do we do in the framework of the project? So when we raise these questions, we realize that the tools, a bit like when we're cooking, if we're making an omelette, we need a fork rather than a wooden spoon. And it's the same thing for consultation. To give you a concrete example of how we develop a consultation system with tricky people or people who are opponents to a project, what we sometimes do in certain projects with regard to certain territories is what we call controversy workshops. So we've understood that there is a problem of sharing of the perception of the same territory or a project. So, for example, biogas or wind turbines, they're opponents. So how do you go about these controversy workshops? Well, they allow people to free their speech, and both those that have objective scientific expertise, but those that have subjective expertise and knowledge of the territory. both expertises will be placed at the same level. They will have the same weight. And the objective at the end of this type of workshop is to allow each to argument and therefore to manage to objectivize their subjectivity and to manage to argument the objectivity of others. And this allows us to have something more tangible around which we can talk later on. So there are how many people in the room? Is there a moderator? Yes, there's moderation, there's a workshop and pre-prepared timelines. And it's not necessarily open to everybody. We can open it to everybody, but not necessarily. Often we open it to people who have something to say because they're not in agreement with what's happening. And it can be very useful when we present the studies of a project. And they allow the project bearer to say, this is why we want to do it here, this is why we want to do that, and to allow those that live in the territory to say, well, this is why it will be a problem. And that's what it's for, because an engineering office will come with a certainty about the challenge, and the users will come along with a certainty about their usage. So it's not a public meeting. We present the studies in unison. It is a real workshop with the two parties placed at the same level. So it allows us to have a view of on both sides, and it's very enriching. And every time people come out of this with the understanding of something that they could not have imagined before, or that they didn't know, that there were good intentions on both sides. So it reestablishes dialogue. Thank you very much, Paula. Pauline, you also said there were lots of tools, but you said, I would like something concrete. We do field visits. So if there's an opposition, for example, to a biogas project, or rather wind turbines, yes, because biogas was not the good example, but for wind turbines or PV farms, you visit the sites. Yes, I agree with everything that has been said by Paula, of course. But if I may, we talk a lot about opposition. But the major challenge that we face in our consultations across France is the lack of participation. And I think it's important to say this. We organize dozens of consultations. And when there were 3 people, we're disappointed. Yes, when you've, communicated with through the town channels with the support of elected representatives, and we've launched 5,000 invitations, and only 30 people turn up. There's a great deal of disappointment with regard to everything we organise in France because we can diversify tools, we adapt to the news and the time constraints of the territory, but it's very difficult to mobilize inhabitants. That's a fact. I'm going to talk about the visits, but we come back to going door to door to talk to people. I will let our colleague Julien talk about this, but we feel this need increasingly of initiating a consultation by going door to door, by going to the inhabitants' homes. And that's what Cécile was saying, to go along with the elected representatives so that you're not just a nobody, but there's a familiar face. Yes, because we realise when we go from door to door that there are many inhabitants that don't feel able to come and talk about that type of subject. So we try and, raise all of the obstacles. And we also organise visits because we need concrete facts. So what better than talk about a project directly on the site so that people can see exactly what the project will be like. And what better to talk about wind turbine technology or solar technology than to go and visit a site. What farm did you go and visit, for example? Well, the Fasciné-le-Tour, a farm in the Haute-Loire, for example, with the support of the mayor, and which allowed us to concretely talk with the inhabitants and the elected representatives. And did it allow did we allow people to become more favourable? Yes, and to talk about the noise when you're standing at the foot of the wind turbines. Yes, and all of the preconceived ideas that people have around different new technologies. Thank you for this new tool. We can come back in detail. I can see also that there are questions about tools. Clémence, with Éclair Occitanie, you've developed a game, we might say, which should be here, but is not here anymore. I'm sorry, I apologize. So can you tell us a bit more about the game that you play with the elected representatives? Yes, it is a game. It's super fun. No, there's no perfect tools, but there are some which work quite well. So we developed a workshop called Mixed Energy Workshops in EnerGaïa, with all of the findings that we just talked about, the fact that energy is not a very exciting topic for most people. It's a complex subject, the energy transition. In 2021, a lot of very good quality works have been published. The RTE report, the prospective scenarios of the ADEME, the updating of the negawatt, and there are 11 energy transition scenarios produced by 3 very different structures. And there are a great number of major agreements. So what are the scenarios in agreement, and where are there real controversies? Because that's also important. So we invented this workshop. We take 3 hours of people's time before we talk about projects or wind turbines. People must take 3 hours to think about why we're talking about energy transition, what are the real topics, and to give them the time. We'll come back to this, but we have to give people the means, and everybody's understood that, there was climate deregulation, but to make the link with producing renewables without talking about renovation and reduction, it is impossible for people. We cannot expect them to understand the stakes of a wind turbine project in their territory if we don't take the time to explain why we're talking about energy transition. So is it private individuals and elected representatives? Yes, and it's even better when everyone's in the room. So yes, we do it in high schools, not necessarily in the support of a project consultation. We can use it, but it's upstream. And so that's the 0 point of a project consultation. Or, sometimes I even do it just because the town hall of Saint-Bosy-de-Montmel wanted to get its citizens talking about energy. So with the Watt Peak Citizen Corporation, we did it on a Saturday afternoon. There are 15 people in the room who took 3 hours of the time on a Saturday afternoon, whereas the weather was beautiful and Saint-Bosy-de-Montmel is really beautiful, but they took that time to talk about energy. It's a very fast-paced workshop, and at the end we don't come out with recommendations on what we must do with the territory, but with the desire to say, well, I understand things better, I understand what is complicated, and I understand what the real subjects of controversy are where we need to spend some time. And it's fun because it's called Energy Me. I took a few copies here. Yes, there were some photos, and the people around the table were playing with the cards. Yes, we tried to make it fun because it does last 3 hours. And also to say that we can't talk about energy transition from a number of angles. So there is the angle of, we did a pairs game. For example, there's controversy. And the controversy is what? Well, security of supply. What energy mix gives us the best security for supply? Well, not everybody is in agreement. Some people think that it's 100% renewables, and some think that nuclear should be part of the mix. So there's a debate there. And then there's the risk angle. So we have a game which is a taste of risk. What taste do you have for risk? Are you okay to take the risk of a blackout, or are you ready to take a risk to increase inequalities among inhabitants? So talking about energy transition, it means talking about a social model from the angle of controversy, a risk, etc. And so people enjoy it so much that they even want to stay 4 hours. And what's good is we didn't dampen people's spirits by talking about energy. So it's a workshop called Energy Mix. There are 130 people in France that are trained to organize these workshops, and there's a website called energy-mix.org. Perfect. Thank you very much, Clémence. Julian, we talked about going door to door. That is really your favorite tool. As we were saying, oral discussion. How do you develop this? Do you go there, or do you recruit people to do it? What happens?
The idea of going door to door, it came from to unlearn what we learned at school. At school, we were going from the general to the individual. I think with humans, it's the opposite. We have to go from the individual to the general. So going door to door is this idea that we're going to create, and you spoke about processes, which is very spot on. We're going to create a panel, a group, and we'll try to, in a certain area, in rural areas, in my experience, the best way of communicating is radio country, which is word of mouth. That really works. So going to meet people, why? It's not just going door to door, it's giving information. We meet people who are 7 meters away from the site and don't know about the project when there's been meetings, public meetings for 5 years. Can you give me a clear example? Yes, on a project in Charente, where some people, multiple people who lived near the site were absolutely unaware, and so a public survey was going to begin in 2 months, and it was for wind turbines, which is now built today. So this idea of going door to door is to listen. How do we listen? I'm not a sociologist. I don't make surveys, so I have a partner who carries out interviews, and that's what's really original in this approach. The idea is to listen to these people, creating a trusting relationship, and we learned a lot, which, ideas that didn't really come to us at first, but it was interesting. A man and a woman is the best way to go and meet people. When we get to a certain area, no one knows we're coming, but as a mediator, when we're a man and a woman going door to door, it works best. We often think we're Jehovah's Witnesses, but if they do it, it's because Americans do it, and Americans are very pragmatic. So if you arrive with a man and a woman, this works best. And then we listen, and this allows us to, we talk about the lack of people discussing these things. It's also a question when we have a lack of participation, what are the solutions? And we discovered, we all know the sociological limitations to express ourselves. There's a lot of literature on the limits of participation, and that leads to very vast, broad questions about democracy. When we talk about participative democracy and no one participates, that's an issue. So when we meet people door to door, hear their voices, this allows us to give a voice to the voiceless. We have those who are against, and we're going to go meet up with them. We don't discriminate. And it's also to carry their voice for many reasons. They're young parents, they've got children at home. It's not easy to exchange for many, many reasons, because we don't speak up. So this allows us to meet the people living there. This mission, or it can last for a week or longer, depending on the size of the area we need to meet. The people that we meet, we can meet up to 30 per day. And the amount of interviews, or people who accept to be interviewed, is between 7 to 10 per day. You mustn't forget, in rural areas where there's a lower population, when we've got 40 to 50 interviews, it's huge from a statistical point of view. As a reminder, you can go on the IFOP website. There's about 43 million citizens who can vote in France. So you're reaching 40 to 50 people, you've listened to them, and then what do you do with their feedback? My director, who has a lot of talent, and she creates a sonar panorama with all of the opinions of these people. So it's an ephemeral broadcast, and we can hear their voices. We also have written what they said. We've written out the recordings. So people trust us since 2018, but it's an ephemeral. We don't give it back to the clients. We start talking with them. Before talking, we listen. to what we heard in these areas. And I'm always surprised about how much attention we give to these recordings. And we live in a society that is dominated by the paradigm of image. We know that we ask a lot of questions about how these images are manipulated with AI. This continues on, and it's become even more important. How we frame a picture, we can interpret it in so many ways. So I often tell my clients the competition of is a readability is a war that we're maybe losing, but we need to substitute visibility and replace it by audio. When we go out of an image and we listen, we create a different relationship between people, for ourselves and amongst themselves, and for the project leaders who are involved as well. So no image, but sound. Thank you so much to all four of you for these tools. So there's a lot of questions, but don't hesitate to keep asking your questions on Slido. The first question, do we have to be an expert to do this consulting? You're all professionals. Can a project leader who doesn't do this consulting, can they begin? Well, I have a training. I don't think you need to be an expert, but I think you need skills. I think you need a lot of care and be able to listen and start with the idea that you're not right. So change your approach. When we have this ability, whether we're trained or not, whether we have studies or diplomas in consulting or anything else, those are real advantages to be successful. And then methods and tools are not what is the most important, because you can find them or you can learn them. But what's important is having these human skills that are real and sincere. And I would add to that, yes, these are skills and just, good sense. Common sense. At the beginning of our process of consulting, we invite elected officials to do 1 day of training in consulting, understand how to position themselves. So it's training in consulting, but also we want them to learn about renewable energies. But we take 1 day. I trained 30 elected officials of the Grand FIJAC. We had 2 workshops in the day. And I say how we create a consulting process, why it's important to give a framework to this. I give them a list of tools to use, and I say, of course, we need to understand how to choose the right tool. It takes 1 day, and the elected official can't create the entire process on their own, but they can have better ideas. They'll understand when they need to hire someone professional, how much budget to give to that. So take a day to train, to learn learn how to structure it. That answers a question that we had earlier. If elected officials aren't used to consulting, how would you define your approach? We saw it with the visits and the games and the training. We've got to do this long before starting our actual project. And I think we answered that. So here's a new question. How do you explain the lack of participation? Solutions to, meet people, to involve people. On the lack of participation, if we have to deploy, we've got to be more creative and have better means to go find these people. It's not because people don't want to. It's not a lack of desire. The real life of people is to get up early, go to work, ask ourselves questions about what am I going to make for dinner, who's going to watch my kids. We're asking people to do more and more to be perfect citizens, to work harder, to work more. But when we don't give them, as long as we don't give them the means to take the time to improve a project, because that's what we expect people to do. Come freely, voluntarily to improve our project. We can't criticize them later for being in a local building that has terrible lighting. We've got to go to these people's doorsteps, and if we're convinced that our projects are better when we've consulted with these individuals, it's us as professionals who have to make the effort and not expect or criticize citizens for not coming to us. Absolutely. There's many things here. The first, consulting and participation is a citizen's right. It's in the Environmental Charter and the French Constitution. It's a right that we all have to be informed and participate in decision-making for projects that will have an impact on our life and environment. When we ask the question about participation, we ask if there's agreement, which allows us to understand if we don't feel concerned, we're not going to participate for all the reasons that Clémence just said. So basically, the objective is to try to see, prior to that, what we can do so that people understand what is going to take place will have an impact on their life and their daily life. What is the relationship to their daily life? And I think that's the key to incentivize these people in the project, for them to understand what will change for them. And to do so, we go door to door, which is a very efficient method. There's another element that's important, which is trust. How do we make the elected officials and citizens trust so that they're able to participate? And how do we give a framework to this so that they trust us and what we might do with their opinions following this? Say that there's a gray area, as Julian defined it. We might trust, but for those who are against it, it's very difficult for them to trust what you're saying. We're not trying to convince people. We're trying to respect their opinions and create a trusting framework where everyone's opinion will be taken into consideration, and that's the objective of these workshops. If these controversial workshops aren't organized, then we have an issue. So these people need to trust us prior. When we're talking about consulting, is the administration a blocking issue, and how do we deal with that? I see that Julien's smiling. The administration doesn't consult citizens. So we're talking about local citizens, we're talking about elected officials. Administration isn't involved. Sometimes there's an institutional mediation that happens, but when people laugh in my face when we talk about this. We create processes with administrative officials, with elected officials. And I had two very diverse projects with wind turbines, one in Indre and the other in Seine-Maritime. I was alone trying to create this consulting or this process to exchange with state services. Of course, I was totally unsupported by elected officials, so it was a big flop. Contrary to that, in Seine-Maritime, I had a very motivated elected official. He was rather important. He was the president of the commune. He was a mayor, vice president of the general council. He said, call me, and if you don't get an answer in 48 hours, I'll call. And that, really made it successful. So elected official support is important. I see that there are other questions, but I want to keep going because there is a third part, which is about opposition. How far can we go dealing with opposition? So this is a question for all four. How do we listen and integrate their requests of those who are opposed? How far, you spoke of conditions earlier, or feasibility. How far can we go? When is a project irreversible? We have to stop exchanging. Have you had, clear examples? Up to public survey, I have intervened. Now, developers were panicked by saying, "Oh, we didn't do what we needed to do. Can you come in?" So I came in and created a dialogue 48 hours before the public survey. And the commissary, who was the investigator, found it very interesting. He enjoyed listening to the recordings. He said it helped him in his work. Maybe as well, opposition, and we say it, consulting isn't to limit recourse. We are never committed to, if you do your consulting right, there will not be any legal recourse. Some people don't participate. Some people will use it to deploy every argument that's true or not for those who oppose, or even become an opponent after consulting. We always have to listen because we've got to understand what's really behind all this, but you mustn't create your consulting process by being obsessed, and that's often what elected officials do, being obsessed with those who oppose it. Because then we forget all of those who are there who are curious, who want to gather information because they have something to say, and it's more constructive. However, never listening to those who oppose it or excluding them from any territorial discussion. Of course, that's going to have a backlash on elected officials, those leading the consulting process, and we've got to trust the group. I say this a lot. We had a good example with Energies. There was a public meeting. We were speaking about the panel of citizens on how to improve this wind turbine project that was also led by Energies and the local authority. And then there were some opponents that were very angry. It was kind of a public spectacle that we've all been part of. And the entire group saw this happening. A first comment, second comment, you're not, playing along. I was trying to lead this discussion by saying the way you're speaking bothers me. It's not allowing us to have a fruitful exchange. And it's kind of a theater created, whereas these opponents who are kind of in an artistic performance, this is seen by all the others. So it's not up to us to limit people from speaking, but we've got to show to others so that everyone can see what's taking place. That's really important. So expertise of leading these meetings. Yeah, I have this same idea. Giving a framework to all this. It gives a bit of a framework for all, and for the participants that really want to continue having a constructive discussion. This is very important to us. We're helped along by this to create a constructive, caring dialogue, respecting everyone's thought. Is it important to have public or private meetings? How do we bring people together? We give a framework. At the beginning of the meeting, you talk about the rules for this discussion. We ask the assembly if everyone agrees to these rules, and then people regulate themselves in the group that are going to remind those that are, not within the framework to come back and respect the rules. And I would add to that, even though I agree with everything that's been said, there's a demand of opponents or those who are opposed. They have their own interests, needs, constraints, expectations, and it's important to understand what's behind all that. Once we've understood it, we don't have to agree, but we've listened, we've debated, and maybe that's the objective of this process. Let's debate what isn't right for us. Now I understand what you don't like because I heard what you said. I listened to what you said. I think we've really, and to add to what Paula said, in mediation we say that anger is an emotion that's limiting us. You've got to go beyond anger and understand what the fear is. I have a very moving example. We met a person who was the leader, let's say, of the opponents. And when we met this person, we discovered that she was leading this opposition because she was being faithful to her husband, who is the person who created the movement, and he had died 2 years prior. And she was I think she swore to her husband that she would continue the fight. So it's better to understand what deeply motivates people. So we're going to move on to the Q&A because there's so many. You can also raise your hand and just ask your question. If you don't want to use the application, there's a microphone in the room if you need it. So I'm going to take questions, short questions and short answers because we don't have much time. Prior to going door to door, are those people warned that you'll be passing?
Ça fonctionne, oui.
Oui, c'est moi qui n'entends plus. Pas toujours.
Not always.
C'est très variable.
It depends. It's always an issue of how information circulates. Since advertisers and for 100 years, so we've been sending out flyers and brochures in people's mailboxes. The return rate is 2% max. So sometimes we just arrive in an area nobody knows. I think we need to see, what happens in the field, and judge it by being in the field in your own experience. So we always tell people, always, we tell the elected officials of an area, we let them know. We don't go to someone's home. So elected officials, but not necessarily individual citizens. And the elected officials will then inform their teams depending on the subject, whether they are for or against the project. The position of the elected official is not for us a condition to not consult or go door to door. However, allowing the elected official to know what's going to take place in his area, which can take a long time, and then give him the opportunity to inform his teams, that seems important to us. Sorry. Of course, we always tell the elected officials, but I was talking about in the O of France, for example, the elected officials no longer want to tell their citizens. They say, this is neutral information. They say, okay, yes, we're aware that you're coming. We'll explain that you're not crooks trying to rob elderly people. But if we use a wind turbine in my name, they'll say he's for the project. They'll think I'm for the project, and they won't want to speak.
Je reste avec vous, Paola. En fait, il y avait
So, Paola, there was a question about some of the feedback in the controversial workshops. Do you have any feedback for wind turbines that enriched the project and increased its acceptability? A clear example. Yes.
Notamment, en fait, une question de déviation.
So we had a question about deviations. A project in an area that had been ongoing for quite a long time, but had not been identified by a consulting firm. So it was a road that needed to be deviated. We discovered this thanks to these workshops that had put in place for a wind turbine project in the north of France. The presentation of the study that allowed us to explain how the project would be developed in a very clear manner. It was a workshop only for those who were opponents to the project, very well structured. So this workshop was for them and the elected officials of that region. So there was on one side the elected officials and those who were opponents. Everyone came together, but there was not a collective invitation open to all. The room wasn't open to all. It was very clear. It's for these people because you're elected or you are a member of an association that opposes the project. So there was a presentation of the studies that have been carried out to speak about the project, and contrary to that, the opponents started to explain why they were against it, and they were, really criticizing every study, every challenge, and we understood through that this project that has existed for quite some time, because it didn't evolve, it was not identified by this study. And then we saw the worries that these people had to say that this project was going to make things even more complicated than they had been before. So, there was a lot of overlap, and this allowed the project leaders to consider another project that wasn't at the heart of theirs, but that people were thinking about and to assist. There was another workshop called My Vision of My Region. How can we advance? And I want to jump to that, and because it's so interesting what she's explained. When we consult on a project, we come to an area that has its own history. And it's this type of discussion that allows us to highlight the history of that particular area, its difficulties, and without which we just simply can't move forward, or the lack of consulting within a territory. I have a very clear example for a project where there's another deviation, and it ricocheted to a solar project. I intervened as a mediator in a debate in the south of Poitiers for agrovoltaics. There were 250 people at this public debate. It was huge. I've never seen so many people. When we speak about participation, there was so much. And here we're really seeing a crystallizing situation for a deviation project in this, urban area. It was very badly managed. And the agrivoltaic project was kind of taking all the blame for this. And they never used mediation. So it was very difficult to rebuild after that. So understanding the history and the culture of that particular area. One question, the energy mix workshops, are they only here in Occitanie region? But we saw that 130 people were trained in all of France. And what to do after the game? What's the next step? I love that we're calling it a game. You did say it was fun. So people who come and spend 3 hours and want to continue, we conclude by cooking in the region. So how to act locally for energy transition. We can give added value or have a bicycle repair shop or something else. If they're really motivated and they want to better understand and act for the energy transition, then they can do something very clear, join an association, collectivity. And then we've got another longer approach. We think it's important to start with energy mix, but then bring it to your own territory, even though we talk about national controversies. So then we zoom in. So we invite them to a secondary workshop, Destination Tepos from the Claire network. Or then we've got Étape Paysage when there's, for example, something happening in a particular landscape or so there's a real process for those who want to do all 5 workshops. That's great. But as we said, I like when the workshops are autonomous. And someone who, have a babysitter for their kids, they won't be able to come to all 5 meetings. But if they can come to one, they've learned something, they were able to express things. And if they don't come back, that's enough, let's say. So one energy mix workshop is enough because we can't expect people to come to 5 3-hour meetings in 2 months. So they're autonomous, but there's something else they can do. They can join an association or another network, and people are trained all over France, and we continue to train people, and who then want to be trained and to carry out these workshops themselves. Very quickly, some of the consulting approaches, are they based on random selection, or is it voluntary? There were citizen conferences that were very trendy with the panel of created by professional structures. We don't have the means, so sometimes we do it kind of last minute. For the Sévrac d'Aron consulting, we had a citizen panel. Some were voluntary, or half were voluntary, and other people were selected at random. What about when we finish a meeting, we've got the framework. If the assembly doesn't agree with the framework, what do you do? Has this already happened? Yes. It's never happened to me. So you redraw the framework. You debate with them. What are the rules? We debate about how we're going to debate. It takes a bit more time than the time that was allowed, but we say, okay, we agree. We said that we'd be here up until this time. It's going to shift. We're going to be here longer, but we can work more quickly. And how do you want us to move forward? If you're here, it's because you want us to do something. We're not here for no reason. Agree on 3 elements, and we identify why we don't agree with the framework. What's the issues? Sometimes it's an issue of trust. When there are opponents, they say, we don't trust you. So what can we do so that you trust us? Come up here. You write the minutes. You do the reporting. You validate it before it's sent to the other participants. We can find many solutions. Sometimes people say I can't participate because they don't know who's there. And if there are 50 people, we take the time that everybody introduces themselves. People are suspicious that maybe the people don't actually live there. So sometimes people are just mistrusting and they're a bit wary. And they have their reasons, because some of these consultings have been poorly managed. So we've got to give a good framework and that it satisfies the most people in the room. Some simply leave. They say, I wasn't here for that. And I'd rather these people leave rather than staying for 3 hours and saying they're angry. We accept people to leave. Julian, it's never happened to me, but collective consent is fundamental. Reciprocity is also very important. The freedom of those people there to speak, and those who are mediators as well. I always tell everyone, you can refuse that I lead the debate. That's fine, I'll leave. But you'll have lost the opportunity to do something together. And as one of my trainers said, mediation is somewhere between care and threat. Thank you to all 4 of you. I think that's what we're going to end with. Just a comment, there's a lot of women on the panel, and I usually lead technical meetings with only men. Is consulting a very feminine job? Well, I didn't become a woman on purpose, but I work in a sector, the energy sector, which is extremely masculine. And I don't think I was invited because I was a woman. I certainly hope not. But I don't know why. There's mostly women up here. But we have a lot of men on our team. So there's just as many men as women. Unfortunately, not all men are in consulting. Thank you so much, all 4 of you. We can give them a round of applause. And the video of the conference will be available on replay in January on the EnerGaïa website. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.